In this video, I'm going to talk about probably one of the most centrally important things about schizophrenia, psychoses, and almost any mental condition which causes unfavorable experiences, and that is the central nervous system. So when you think of who you are, what you are, it's quite difficult. It's something philosophically up for question and scientifically a mystery and, subjectively a torment. But ultimately, biologically, what we know is that we have a central nervous system. And this is the connection of, say, the spinal connections and the lower brain and all that sort of stuff. It's not really important. What you need to know is that this keeps its own memory, its own log of the world, effectively. There's a great book called The Body Keeps the Score, which kind of goes into this topic in a bit more detail. Which I won't in this video. But ultimately, who we are is we're very complicated animals, right? And a good way to think of us, which I like to do this, is imagine that we were just living in a small tribe in the middle of a forest. We would need to focus on basic needs like food, shelter, and then each other, right? Nothing else exists outside the tribe. And so if you had just sat in the tribe around the campfire one night and all of a sudden you started getting really afraid and you didn't know what was going on, and you didn't know, you couldn't think, well, what's going on here? This is a sign there's something wrong with the nervous system. And so many of us actually have gone through very difficult childhoods, very rough experiences, many different things. And what this does is this calibrates our nervous system to be kind of a little bit haywire. Now, though we might have those biological systems, we also have this kind of conscious element. And I've really learned to pay attention to a different kind of inner dialogue. There's inner emotional dialogue, and then there is inner calm dialogue. The nervous system promotes, when it's not calibrated properly, so you have a rough childhood, all this stuff, that nervous system promotes a lot of emotional dialogue. And as you've seen in my other videos, there's things like emotionally driven ignorance, where emotions kind of prevent logical, rational, reasonable thinking. And if you were in, say, that forest tribe, you would not have much in terms of abstraction going on. There's no governments, there's no policies, there's no planes flying through the sky. It's just you and the people in that tribe. And so if you start thinking up all these very strange things and getting overly emotional, it's going to put a rift between you and the rest of the tribe, naturally. And maybe, I think, old times, like African proverbs kind of hint to this. There's African proverbs. One of my favorites is that fear is a sickness, and fear is a very damaging thing to the tribe, as well as children who don't feel embraced by the tribe eventually burn it down to feel its warmth. And what I'm saying by this is that I think these early tribes had figured out that there really needed to be an attention to other people. And if the attention isn't there, what happens is we get into all these sorts of messes because our dysregulated nervous system is projecting those messes into us, that it leads to all kinds of manners of crazy things. And if you've seen my other videos about hallucinations and, delusions, it all comes from an incalibrated nervous system. If you're calm, if you're not thinking about anything, it's just present, isn't it? It's just the fire in the tribe and the people you're around. It's nice and it's calm. But in the world that we live in today, discalibrated nervous systems mixed with all the issues in the outside world is just a recipe for disaster. You see these people that get really emotional, really kind of all over the place about everything. And that's what I've been like. I've had to work so hard not to have that happen. But when we're in the world that we live in today, with all of the complexities going on around us, when your nervous system is discalibrated and you've maybe got stored trauma in there, or you've got past bad experiences, reasons to distrust, you really need to, this is what I call bringing back to baseline. And this means just being in your own world. So focusing on your environment, focusing on where you are. When you go on a hike, focus on just being on the hike. When you go on a walk, just focus on being on the walk, and try to remove the outside world on all its complexities. Don't watch the news. don't get engaged in politics, don't get engaged in complex social affairs or work drama until you know that your nervous system is brought down to a calm place. The thing about being calm is that we have evolved over the years to develop the higher cognitive thinking of rationale and reason and logic. We've evolved that skill, but that skill can be very easily quietened, and it's quietened by disruptive experiences like hyper emotional states, a discalibrated nervous system, or even our environment, right? When you can see this, I think, in the world that we're in today, everything is so chaotic and all over the place that it's almost impossible to detach yourself. But when you're suffering from any of these mental health conditions, it's exactly what you need to do, even though you don't want to. You need to block out the outside world, focus on your family, your friends, and try to calm yourself as much as possible. And so healing a distrustful nervous system needs to come in the form of peace and quiet, and allowing, think of a scared dog, like a dog that you've adopted, right? That's exactly how you need to treat your nervous system. And if you've got loved ones in your life that are going through these conditions, just see the nervous system, because the mind is so complicated. It can come up with all these words and reasons and logics and rationales that don't make sense because it's all emanating from that, nervous system. So when you've adopted a dog and it's terrified, it might sit in the corner for a while. The last thing you try to do is explain Aristotelian philosophy and why the world needs to be blah, 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 blah. You just allow it space and peace to huddle away in the corner, and you keep feeding it and gaining its trust, right? And over time, the dog starts to trust you, and then the true expression of the dog is revealed. But if you rush that process, if you punish the dog, if you try to force it out too early and play with it when it doesn't want to, it might bite you, and the worst expression of that dog is revealed. And we are just like that. If we don't take the steps to calm down our emotional systems, our nervous system, what happens is that we become the worst expressions of ourselves. And it's very difficult in the mess that we can make through that process to then calm things down. It's kind of like an inferno, right? You're discentered, and so everything that you're generating is from a position of fire and discomfort. And then so what happens is you create lots more of that until your life becomes it. And then it's very hard to escape it. You might ruin friendships, you might be mean to your family, you might get angry and say things that you can't take back. And so it's so important to reduce yourself to a calm state. And when you are calm, then you interact with things. And then if you find yourself getting angry again, retreat, calm yourself down, and then re-enter. And it's exactly the same with thoughts. I have to do this for my own sanity. If I find myself thinking in emotion, especially negative emotion, what I will do is I'll go, okay, I'm not going to think about it right now. I'm just going to feel it. And I'm going to return to my baseline. And then I'm going to logically think about where that emotion came from when I'm calm. And that way I'm bringing out the best expression of me by doing that. I hope that makes sense. But I wanted to make this video today, just like a little rant and rave, really. On why the nervous system is so important in everyday life and how to see people. We've lost that ability, I think. When you're looking at someone, if they're sat down and they're happy and they're looking at you and they're talking to you, it's like, oh, great, they're calm, maybe they get a bit excited. It's all coming from a good place, best expression of the person. But if the person's here, I used to see this all the time, but I'd go out and hang out with people and there'd be a person like this. I'd just be like, you okay? How are you doing? And then try to bring out that expression of them slowly. We don't really, we like to see, for some reason, and I think this is because we've become very confused about who we are and what we are, because of how much of our identity has been politicized in the world and how much we're all fighting for our right to be in the world. We've kind of forgotten the core element of people, and that is that they are essentially a spirit, and that spirit can be dampened or it can be, improved. And when you see people like this, it's just a sign that that nervous system is not in a happy place. And so whenever you see people in that place, you approach them like, I guess, you would a stray dog. I know that sounds really weird, but we contain all of the neurobiology effectively, the same cognitive, the same biological makeup as animals. And so imagining an animal is like imagining a very simplistic human without the ability to think up all the mess that they do. And so approaching people like that allows a sense of care. It also allows you to see through the noise, right? Because someone might be saying all kinds of things that make you angry or make you confused. But if you just look at how the human is, then, because if they aren't sitting like this and they're sitting like that and then they're saying things all over the place, it's like, okay, well, look, you need to come back at least 10,000 steps and just acknowledge that that person isn't ready to have the conversation yet and then build up from there. We don't do that in today's society, and we especially don't do it with people that are mentally unwell. And that's why it's so important for families and yourself to pick that up, because when people are taken to psychiatric wards, they're put into a place of like maximal stress. There's people there screaming, there's people shouting, the nurses are all apprehensive and paranoid because they don't know what the person's going to do. And so that does not do anything for that underlying nervous system. It just charges it up, makes it worse. That's why they need medication intervention most of the time, like they, as much as they do. Even though it is useful, it's like a necessity with the environments they have, because they can't encourage the calmness that would be so helpful. But yeah, have a good day.